The story behind the Wolverine begins long before the cameras started rolling in 2012. In many ways, the film represents years of experimentation, changing creative directions, and a determination by both the filmmakers and the studio to redefine one of Marvel's most recognizable characters. Rather than simply creating another action-heavy superhero adventure, the goal eventually became to tell a more personal story centered on identity, mortality, redemption, and emotional healing. Reaching that point, however, required nearly a decade of planning, multiple writers, several directors, and significant shifts in creative philosophy. The origins of the project can be traced back to the enormous popularity of Wolverine within Marvel Comics. Since his introduction in the 1970s, Wolverine evolved into one of Marvel's most beloved characters. Unlike many traditional superheroes, Logan was defined by contradictions. He possessed extraordinary healing abilities and nearly indestructible adamantium bones, yet emotionally he remained deeply scarred by violence, guilt, and centuries of accumulated trauma. Readers connected with his struggle because beneath his incredible powers was someone who constantly questioned his own humanity. When the first X-Men film was released in 2000, Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine quickly became one of its greatest successes. Although Wolverine was originally intended as one member of a larger ensemble, Jackman's performance elevated the character into the emotional center of the franchise. His combination of physical intensity, vulnerability, and understated charisma resonated with audiences worldwide. By the time X2 arrived in 2003 and X-Men: The Last Stand followed in 2006, Wolverine had effectively become the face of the X-Men film series. As Hugh Jackman's popularity increased, the idea of creating standalone Wolverine films became increasingly attractive to 20th Century Fox. The studio recognized that Wolverine possessed enough popularity to carry his own franchise independent of the larger X-Men ensemble. Unlike other mutants, Logan's mysterious past offered countless opportunities for storytelling. His long lifespan, military experiences, and fragmented memories allowed writers to explore different periods of history while developing the character in ways that ensemble films could not. The first attempt at establishing this solo franchise came with X-Men Origins: Wolverine, released in 2009. That film focused primarily on Logan's early life, his relationship with his half-brother Victor Creed, and the Weapon X program responsible for bonding adamantium to his skeleton. Financially, the movie performed well enough to justify another installment, but its critical reception proved disappointing. Many viewers felt that it relied too heavily on spectacle while neglecting the emotional complexity that had made Wolverine so compelling in previous films. The screenplay was criticized for simplifying important aspects of Logan's personality, introducing too many supporting characters, and emphasizing large-scale action over meaningful character development. Rather than abandoning the character, Fox viewed these criticisms as valuable lessons. Studio executives realized that audiences were interested in a different kind of Wolverine film. Instead of another origin story packed with numerous mutants and oversized action sequences, viewers wanted a more intimate exploration of Logan himself. This realization became one of the guiding principles for what would eventually become the Wolverine. The biggest source of inspiration came directly from one of the most celebrated Wolverine comic storylines ever published. During the early 1980s, writer Chris Claremont and artist Frank Miller created a limited comic series simply titled Wolverine. Rather than focusing exclusively on superhero battles, the comic transported Logan to Japan, where he became entangled in political intrigue, organized crime, samurai traditions, and questions about honor. The story presented Wolverine as a wandering warrior seeking purpose rather than simply a superhero fighting villains. This comic represented a major turning point in Wolverine's history. Before its publication, Logan was largely known as a fierce member of the X-Men. Afterward, readers gained a deeper understanding of his internal conflicts, philosophical beliefs, and emotional vulnerability. The Japanese setting introduced themes of discipline, sacrifice, cultural identity, and personal honor that contrasted beautifully with Wolverine's animalistic instincts. Many fans considered this storyline the definitive Wolverine story, making it a natural choice for cinematic adaptation. Interestingly, elements of this comic had already been considered during the development of earlier X-Men films. Even while working on X-Men Origins, Wolverine, producers had discussed adapting the Japan storyline next if the first solo movie proved successful. Hugh Jackman himself had repeatedly expressed interest in telling this story because it focused less on spectacle and more on Logan's character. He believed audiences were ready to see a different side of Wolverine, one that emphasized emotion rather than constant combat. Once development officially began, the screenplay entered a long period of revision. Several writers contributed at different stages, each attempting to balance faithfulness to the original comic with the realities of the existing X-Men movie continuity. This proved challenging because the film was not adapting the comic in isolation. Instead, it also needed to function as a sequel to X-Men: The Last Stand, a film whose ending left Logan emotionally devastated following the death of Jean Grey. This narrative decision significantly altered the direction of the adaptation. In the original comic, Wolverine travels to Japan seeking personal fulfillment and reconnecting with Mariko. In the film, Logan arrives burdened by grief, guilt, a psychological trauma. His emotional state reflects years of violence, loss, and isolation. Rather than merely adapting the comic panel for panel, the writers used its framework to continue Logan's cinematic character arc. The decision to set the film after The Last Stand also allowed the screenplay to explore consequences that previous superhero films often ignored. Logan had killed the woman he loved to save countless others. Although he had done the right thing, emotionally he remained haunted by that choice. Nightmares, hallucinations, and recurring visions of Jean Grey became central components of his psychological journey. When James Mangold accepted the challenge of directing the Wolverine, he was stepping into a franchise that had already established one of the most recognizable superheroes in modern cinema. Yet instead of simply trying to make a larger, louder, or more explosive sequel, Mangold approached the project with a very different philosophy. He saw the film as an opportunity to explore the psychology of its central character rather than merely showcasing his extraordinary abilities. His vision centered on creating a story that examined what it means to be immortal, what happens when someone who has survived countless tragedies begins to question the value of living, and how personal redemption can become more powerful than physical strength. Mangold had built his reputation directing films that focused heavily on character. Throughout his career, whether making crime dramas, westerns, romantic stories, or biographical films, he consistently demonstrated an interest in emotionally complex individuals facing moral dilemmas. His protagonists were rarely perfect heroes. Instead, they were flawed people carrying emotional baggage, struggling with difficult choices, and attempting to reconcile their past with their future. Wolverine fit naturally into this style of storytelling because Logan had always been defined by his emotional scars as much as by his physical abilities. Rather than viewing the film primarily as another superhero installment, Mangold often described it as a character drama disguised as an action film. This distinction became one of the guiding principles behind every major creative decision. The action sequences existed not simply to entertain audiences, but to reveal something about Logan's emotional state. Every fight, injury, and confrontation reflected his internal struggles. Violence was never presented as an end in itself, but as an extension of character development. One of Mangold's first priorities was making Logan feel vulnerable again. In many previous X-Men films, Wolverine's healing factor had made him nearly unstoppable. Although audiences enjoyed watching him recover from impossible injuries, that invincibility also removed much of the suspense. If viewers believed Logan could survive anything, physical danger lost much of its emotional impact. Mangold believed that true drama depends upon uncertainty. The audience must feel that the protagonist can lose something meaningful. Therefore, the decision to weaken Logan's healing abilities became central to the director's vision. Suddenly, every punch hurt. Every cut mattered. Every bullet wound carried genuine consequences. Instead of functioning like an indestructible superhero, Logan became something closer to a wounded samurai struggling through overwhelming odds. This vulnerability also aligned with one of the film's larger philosophical questions. Logan had lived for well over a century. During that time, he experienced wars, personal losses, betrayals, and countless violent encounters. Immortality, which might appear to be a blessing, had gradually become a burden. Mangold wanted audiences to understand that endless life carries its own psychological costs. Logan had watched friends grow old and die while he remained essentially unchanged. The emotional weight of those experiences had accumulated over decades. The director therefore framed the story less as an adventure and more as an examination of exhaustion. Logan begins the film isolated in the wilderness, avoiding human contact and haunted by memories of Jean Grey. He is no longer searching for glory or purpose. Instead, he simply wants peace from the guilt that continues to define his existence. This emotional starting point differs significantly from many superhero films, where protagonists usually begin eager to embrace their heroic responsibilities. Mangold also drew heavily from classic samurai cinema. The influence of Japanese filmmaking can be seen throughout nearly every aspect of the movie, from its visual composition to its pacing and themes. Directors such as Akira Kurosawa had long explored stories of wandering warriors attempting to live according to personal codes of honor despite existing within corrupt societies. Logan fit naturally into this tradition. Rather than treating Japan merely as an exotic backdrop, Mangold embraced its cultural identity as an essential storytelling element. Logan enters a world where discipline, tradition, respect, and family honor shape nearly every interaction. These values stand in sharp contrast to Logan's own instinctive, impulsive nature. Throughout the film, he slowly begins to rediscover aspects of dignity and purpose through his encounters with people who continue to value honor despite enormous personal sacrifice. Visually, Mangold sought realism over spectacle whenever possible. Although the film naturally contains elaborate action scenes and computer-generated effects, he consistently attempted to ground those moments within believable physical environments. Practical locations, authentic architecture, real landscapes, and tangible sets help create a world that feels lived in rather than artificial. This grounded visual style extends to the cinematography. Many scenes emphasize natural lighting, restrained camera movement, and carefully composed images instead of constant visual excess. Rather than overwhelming viewers with rapid editing, Mangold frequently allows conversations to unfold patiently, giving actors room to communicate emotion through silence, facial expressions, and body language. This slower rhythm distinguishes the film from many contemporary superhero productions that rely on relentless pacing. Another hallmark of Mangold's directing style involved allowing action scenes to tell stories instead of functioning as isolated set pieces. The famous bullet train sequence demonstrates this philosophy particularly well. On the surface is an exciting fight taking place atop one of the fastest trains in the world. However, beneath the spectacle lies a character-focused conflict. Logan is physically weakened, making every movement dangerous. He cannot simply overpower his enemies through brute strength. Instead, intelligence, adaptability, and determination become essential for survival. Similarly, many of the sword fights throughout the film emphasize technique and emotion rather than sheer destruction. Mangold intentionally embraced martial arts traditions associated with samurai storytelling, allowing combat to reflect personal values, discipline, and psychological conflict. One of the greatest strengths of the Wolverine is the way it builds its world without overwhelming the audience with excessive exposition. Unlike many superhero films that rely on elaborate explanations of fictional civilizations, magical systems, or cosmic mythology, the Wolverine constructs its world by grounding extraordinary events within believable environments. The result is a film that feels more like an international thriller or a samurai drama than a conventional comic book adventure. Every location, building, street, forest, and mountain contributes to the story, creating a world that feels authentic while still accommodating mutants, impossible technology, and larger-than-life conflicts. The film begins by immediately connecting its fictional story to a real historical event. The opening sequence takes place during the final days of World War II in Nagasaki, just before the atomic bomb is dropped. This decision serves several important purposes. On the surface, it introduces Ichiro Yashida as a young Japanese officer whose life will later become intertwined with Logan's. More importantly, it grounds the narrative in actual history, giving the audience an emotional reference point before introducing supernatural elements. By placing Wolverine inside a genuine historical tragedy, the filmmakers remind viewers that this version of the X-Men universe exists alongside real-world events rather than inside an entirely separate fantasy realm. Logan is not simply a superhero existing in an abstract comic book setting. He has witnessed humanity's greatest wars, survived historical disasters, and carried those memories for generations. This historical foundation gives the fictional world additional emotional weight. After the prologue, the story shifts to modern times, where the audience finds Logan living in complete isolation in the Canadian wilderness. This environment immediately communicates his emotional condition without requiring extensive dialogue. Snow-covered mountains, dense forests, abandoned camps, and lonely landscapes reinforce his desire to withdraw from society. Nature becomes both his refuge and his prison. Unlike many superheroes who operate from sophisticated headquarters or bustling cities, Logan has deliberately chosen solitude. His surroundings emphasize silence rather than activity. The wilderness strips away modern distractions, forcing both Logan and the audience to focus on his internal struggles. Even before he speaks many words, viewers understand that this is a man attempting to escape painful memories. The transition from Canada's remote forest to Japan represents one of the film's most significant acts of world-building. Rather than treating Japan merely as an exotic travel destination, the filmmakers immerse the audience in multiple layers of Japanese society. Each location reveals a different aspect of the country's culture, economy, traditions, and social structure. Tokyo serves as the first major urban environment. It is presented as energetic, crowded, technologically advanced, and constantly in motion. Bright lights illuminate towering skyscrapers while crowded intersections overflow with pedestrians moving in every direction. Neon signs, high-speed trains, restaurants, business districts, and modern architecture establish Japan as one of the world's most technologically sophisticated nations. This bustling urban landscape contrasts dramatically with Logan's quiet life in the wilderness. He enters an environment defined by order, efficiency, and overwhelming activity. For someone accustomed to isolation, Tokyo feels almost alien despite existing within the real world. The filmmakers pay close attention to environmental storytelling throughout these scenes. Rather than explaining Japanese society through narration, they allow viewers to absorb information visually. Public transportation functions with remarkable precision. Business etiquette shapes interactions between characters. Crowded streets communicate the scale of urban life. Small cultural details, including bowing, traditional customs, and social formality, naturally emerge through everyday interactions. The film also explores Japan's corporate world through Yashida Industries. The enormous corporation symbolizes modern economic power, while simultaneously reflecting the influence of traditional family dynasties. Massive office buildings filled with glass, steel, and advanced technology create an atmosphere completely different from the quiet temples and countryside shown elsewhere in the film. These contrasting environments illustrate one of the movie's recurring themes: the coexistence of tradition and modernization. Ancient customs continue to influence decisions even within highly advanced technological settings. Characters wear expensive business suits while still respecting centuries-old family obligations. High-tech laboratories exist alongside historic estates. This blend of old and new becomes one of the defining characteristics of the film's world. Perhaps the most visually distinctive location is the Yashida family estate. Unlike the crowded streets of Tokyo, the estate feels isolated, peaceful, and deeply connected to Japanese history. Traditional architecture, carefully maintained gardens, wooden interiors, sliding paper doors, stone pathways, koi ponds, and surrounding forests create an atmosphere of elegance and quiet discipline. The estate functions as far more than a residence. It becomes a symbolic representation of family legacy. Every room seems filled with history. Every hallway reflects generations of accumulated tradition. Unlike many superhero headquarters designed primarily to showcase futuristic technology, the estate communicates identity through architecture itself. Environmental storytelling becomes especially effective here because the building reflects the personalities of its inhabitants. The calm exterior hides intense family conflict. Beautiful gardens surround individuals consumed by ambition, resentment, grief, and deception. The peaceful setting creates dramatic irony, emphasizing how appearances often conceal darker realities. Traditional Japanese temples also play an important role within the narrative. These sacred spaces represent reflection, spirituality, and continuity across centuries. Their quiet atmosphere contrasts sharply with the violence occurring elsewhere in the story. Whenever characters enter these environments, the pace naturally slows, encouraging contemplation rather than action. At first glance, the Wolverine appears to belong to the superhero genre. It features one of Marvel's most iconic characters, includes mutant abilities, contains spectacular action scenes, and exists within a larger X-Men cinematic universe. However, reducing the film to only a superhero movie overlooks much of what makes it distinctive. One of the reasons the Wolverine continues to stand apart from many comic book adaptations is its willingness to blend several different genres into a single narrative. Rather than following the traditional superhero formula from beginning to end, the film incorporates elements of samurai cinema, psychological drama, more mystery, crime thriller, romance, martial arts, espionage, and even horror. These overlapping genres give the movie a unique identity, while allowing director James Mangold to explore Logan's character in ways that would not have been possible within a more conventional superhero framework. The superhero genre naturally forms the foundation of the film. Wolverine possesses extraordinary abilities, including retractable adamantium claws, enhanced senses, remarkable physical strength, and his famous healing factor. The story revolves around threats beyond ordinary human capabilities, while several characters possess unusual powers that separate them from the real world. The narrative also explores themes commonly associated with superhero fiction, including responsibility, sacrifice, identity, and the consequences of extraordinary abilities. However, unlike many superhero films that focus on saving cities, planets, or humanity itself, the Wolverine deliberately narrows its scope. The stakes remain intensely personal for much of the story. Logan is not trying to prevent global destruction or defeat an alien invasion. Instead, he is attempting to protect a single family while confronting his own emotional wounds. This smaller scale immediately differentiates the film from many blockbuster superhero adventures released during the same period. One of the strongest secondary genres influencing the movie is the samurai film. This influence begins with the original comic written by Chris Claremont and illustrated by Frank Miller, both of whom drew inspiration from classic Japanese storytelling. James Mangold embraced these influences throughout the adaptation. Traditional samurai stories frequently center on wandering warriors seeking purpose after experiencing personal tragedy. These characters often struggle between violence and peace while attempting to live according to codes of honor within morally complicated societies. Logan fits this archetype remarkably well. Like many legendary samurai protagonists, he is a skilled fighter burdened by a violent past, searching for meaning rather than glory. The film repeatedly references ideas associated with Bushido, the traditional code emphasizing honor, loyalty, discipline, courage, and self-sacrifice. These concepts influence numerous characters, particularly Mariko, Yukio, Shinjin, and Yashida. Logan himself gradually becomes drawn into questions about honor that extend beyond simple physical survival. Sword combat further reinforces the samurai genre. Unlike superhero battles relying entirely on explosions and visual effects, many confrontations emphasize precision, discipline, and technique. The choreography reflects martial traditions rather than chaotic destruction. Even when Wolverine uses his claws, the movement often resembles swordsmanship more than animalistic aggression. The visual style also borrows from classic samurai cinema. Long moments of silence, careful framing, wide landscape shots, traditional architecture, and deliberate pacing recall the work of influential Japanese filmmakers. Rather than rushing continuously from one action sequence to another, the film frequently pauses to allow emotional reflection. Closely connected to its samurai influences is the film's identity as a psychological drama. In many ways, Logan's greatest enemy throughout the story is not another mutant, but his own emotional trauma. He enters the narrative deeply haunted by guilt over Jean Grey's death, exhausted by centuries of violence, and uncertain whether immortality has become more curse than gift. Psychological dramas emphasize internal conflict as much as external events. The Wolverine consistently follows this approach. Logan's dreams, hallucinations, nightmares, and emotional isolation become just as important as physical confrontations. His journey involves healing emotionally rather than simply defeating villains. This psychological focus transforms the movie into an exploration of grief. Logan has survived nearly everyone he has ever loved. Immortality forces him to repeatedly endure loss while remaining physically unchanged. His emotional exhaustion becomes the central conflict driving the narrative. Another significant genre influence is noir. Although traditional film, noir developed during the 1940s and 1950s. Many of its characteristics appear throughout the Wolverine. Noir stories often feature morally ambiguous protagonists, hidden conspiracies, dangerous women, corrupt organizations, betrayal, and mysteries that gradually reveal deeper layers of deception. Logan functions as a classic noir protagonist in many respects. He is emotionally damaged, distrustful, and constantly pulled into situations he never intended to enter. Rather than actively seeking adventure, events repeatedly force him into dangerous circumstances. The mystery surrounding Yashida's death, the true intentions of several supporting characters, and the hidden conspiracy unfolding beneath the family's public image all reflect noir storytelling traditions. As Logan uncovers one secret after another, the audience gradually realizes that appearances cannot be trusted. The film also embraces the crime thriller genre. Much of the middle section revolves around organized crime, assassination attempts, kidnappings, corporate conspiracies, and powerful criminal organizations. The Yakuza provide a grounded form of danger that differs significantly from cosmic supervillains or world-ending threats. These criminal elements allow the action to feel more immediate and believable. Gunfights, chases through city streets, rooftop pursuits, and close-quarters combat create suspense rooted in physical reality rather than fantasy alone. The opening sequence of The Wolverine is one of the most important sections of the entire film because it establishes nearly every major theme, emotional conflict, and narrative question that will shape the story over the next 2 hours. Rather than beginning with an explosive superhero battle or a showcase of Wolverine's incredible powers, director James Mangold chooses a much more thoughtful approach. The first 10 to 15 minutes gradually introduce audiences to Logan's emotional state, connect the story to an important historical event, establish the film's tone, and prepare viewers for a much more personal adventure than many might initially expect. The very first images transport the audience to Japan during the closing days of World War II. Instead of immediately presenting Wolverine in the present day, The film opens with soldiers awaiting an event they cannot fully comprehend. The location is Nagasaki on the eve of the atomic bombing. This historical setting immediately separates the film from many superhero movies that begin with fictional disasters or comic book mythology. Instead, the audience enters a real historical tragedy that millions recognize. This choice immediately grounds the story in reality. Although mutants and superhuman abilities exist within this universe, the filmmakers remind viewers that these extraordinary characters have lived alongside genuine historical events. Logan is not disconnected from human history. He has experienced it firsthand. This immediately expands the audience's understanding of his age and the enormous emotional burden that accompanies immortality. The opening also introduces a young Japanese officer named Ichiro Yashida. At first, he appears to be a relatively ordinary military officer assigned to guard prisoners during the final hours before the bombing. The audience has little reason to suspect that this man will eventually become one of the story's central figures decades later. This delayed significance is an example of effective narrative planting. Information introduced early gains greater meaning much later. Yashida's behavior during these opening moments immediately establishes important aspects of his personality. Like many soldiers serving during the war, he believes he must fulfill his duty regardless of personal fear. He demonstrates discipline, respect for military authority, and acceptance of sacrifice. Yet beneath this disciplined exterior, viewers can already sense uncertainty. His humanity remains visible despite the circumstances surrounding him. The audience is then introduced to Logan, who at this point is being held as a prisoner of war. His appearance immediately communicates several important characteristics. Even in captivity, Logan remains calm. He does not panic or plead for his life. Instead, he quietly observes his surroundings while accepting whatever may come. Hugh Jackman's restrained performance emphasizes emotional control rather than dramatic heroics. When warning sirens begin sounding throughout the prison camp, confusion quickly spreads. Soldiers receive conflicting information while the sky above grows increasingly ominous. The audience understands, often before the characters do, that something catastrophic is about to occur. This dramatic irony creates immediate tension because viewers recognize the historical significance of Nagasaki even before the characters fully grasp their situation. One of the first major decisions Logan makes defines his character more effectively than pages of dialogue ever could. Despite being imprisoned by Japanese forces during wartime, he urges Yashida to seek shelter. Rather than celebrating the destruction that is about to strike his captors, Logan acts purely out of compassion. He recognizes that whatever differences exist between nations, innocent human beings should not suffer unnecessarily. This moment perfectly establishes Logan's moral compass. Although often portrayed as aggressive, violent, and cynical, he consistently risks himself to save others. His instinct toward protection overrides anger or revenge. This characteristic remains one of the defining qualities of Wolverine throughout the film. The sequence surrounding the atomic explosion is visually striking but emotionally restrained. Rather than treating one of history's greatest tragedies as spectacle, the filmmakers emphasize fear, helplessness, and survival. Logan forces Yashida into a protective well before shielding him with his own nearly indestructible body. This action accomplishes several narrative goals simultaneously. First, it demonstrates the extraordinary extent of Logan's healing abilities. Viewers witness him enduring unimaginable destruction while protecting another human being. Second, it establishes a lifelong emotional bond between Logan and Yashida. Third, it introduces one of the film's central themes, sacrifice. Unlike many superheroes who save strangers because they possess heroic identities, Logan acts instinctively. There is no audience watching him, no reward awaiting him, and no expectation that history will remember his actions. He simply chooses compassion because it aligns with his character. The visual aftermath of the explosion further reinforces the film's grounded tone. Smoke, ash, destruction, and silence dominate the landscape. Rather than immediately moving into fast-paced action, the filmmakers allow viewers to absorb the emotional consequences of what has occurred. This slower pacing signals that the movie values emotional reflection as much as spectacle. The sequence also introduces mortality as a major theme. Thousands perish instantly, while Logan survives impossible devastation. His immortality becomes more than a superpower. It becomes something that separates him from ordinary humanity. As viewers later discover, this separation carries enormous emotional consequences. Following the historical prologue, the film transitions to the present day. Instead of immediately revealing Logan as an active superhero, audiences discover him living alone in the Canadian wilderness. This transition is deliberately abrupt. The contrast between the chaos of wartime Japan and the quiet isolation of modern Canada immediately communicates that decades have passed. The wilderness scenes serve several important storytelling purposes. First, they reveal how dramatically Logan's life has changed. Once surrounded by soldiers, war, and civilization, he now deliberately isolates himself from society. His surroundings communicate loneliness before he speaks a single line of dialogue. One of the defining characteristics of the Wolverine is the way it builds conflict on several different levels at the same time. Rather than relying on a single villain or one straightforward objective, the film layers its conflicts so that every physical confrontation is connected to a deeper emotional or philosophical struggle. Logan is not only fighting enemies who want to capture or kill him. He is also battling his own guilt, questioning his identity, struggling with the possibility of mortality, and searching for a reason to continue living. These overlapping conflicts give the story greater emotional depth and allow the stakes to grow naturally as the narrative progresses. The most obvious conflict is the external struggle between Logan and the various individuals attempting to manipulate him. Throughout the film, he is pursued by assassins, the Yakuza, mutant adversaries, corporate conspirators, and eventually the truth behind Yashida's elaborate plan. On the surface, these conflicts provide the action expected from a superhero film. However, each external obstacle is carefully connected to Logan's internal journey. The film establishes its central internal conflict almost immediately. Logan has survived for well over a century, but instead of viewing immortality as a gift, he has reached a point where endless life feels like an unbearable burden. Unlike most superheroes, who fight to preserve their lives and the lives of others, Logan quietly questions whether he wants to continue existing at all. This emotional exhaustion defines nearly every decision he makes during the first act. He has isolated himself in the Canadian wilderness because human relationships have become too painful. Every person he has loved has either died, suffered, or been placed in danger because of their connection to him. His healing factor protects his body, but offers no protection against grief. This creates one of the film's most compelling conflicts because the audience understands that Logan's greatest wounds cannot be healed physically. His claws cannot solve loneliness. His strength cannot erase traumatic memories. His immortality cannot restore the people he has lost. The recurring visions of Jean Grey constantly reinforce this internal struggle. Whether interpreted as dreams, hallucinations, or manifestations of guilt, her appearances remind Logan of the most painful decision he has ever made. During the events of X-Men: The Last Stand, Logan was forced to kill Jean in order to stop the destructive Phoenix Force. Although his actions saved countless innocent lives, emotionally, he has never forgiven himself. These dream sequences create conflict even during moments when no physical danger exists. Logan cannot escape his memories. Even while sleeping, he remains trapped by the consequences of past choices. The audience therefore understands that his journey toward healing must be psychological as much as physical. One of the most important turning points occurs when Logan's healing factor begins to fail. Until this moment, Wolverine has always relied upon one extraordinary advantage. Regardless of how severely he was injured, his body recovered with remarkable speed. This ability allowed him to survive battles that would instantly kill ordinary people. Once this power is compromised, the nature of every conflict changes dramatically. Suddenly, Logan can bleed. He becomes exhausted. Broken bones do not immediately repair themselves. Gunshot wounds remain dangerous. Every injury accumulates instead of disappearing. This transformation raises the physical stakes enormously. The audience no longer assumes that Logan will survive every encounter without lasting consequences. Every fight becomes unpredictable because failure is now possible. More importantly, however, the weakening of his healing factor creates emotional conflict. Logan has defined himself for generations through survival. If he is no longer immortal, then who is he? Does his identity depend upon his extraordinary abilities, or is there something fundamentally heroic within him independent of those powers? This question becomes one of the film's central philosophical concerns. The conflict surrounding mortality is especially fascinating because it reverses traditional superhero expectations. Most heroes fear death because they want to continue protecting others. Logan, however, initially seems almost willing to embrace death if it means escaping endless emotional suffering. Yashida recognizes this psychological vulnerability and attempts to exploit it. When the elderly Yashida offers Logan the possibility of transferring immortality from Logan to himself, the proposal immediately introduces a profound moral conflict. At first glance, the offer appears compassionate. Logan would finally receive the peaceful death he secretly desires, while Yashida would continue living. However, beneath this apparent generosity lies a far darker motivation. Yashida has become terrified of death. His desire to survive has gradually overwhelmed his moral judgment. Instead of accepting the natural end of life, he seeks to steal another person's gift. This conflict transforms the story from a simple battle between hero and villain into a philosophical debate about mortality itself. Logan has grown tired of immortality. Yashida desperately craves it. One man wishes to surrender endless life. The other will sacrifice nearly everything to obtain it. The contrast between these two perspectives strengthens the narrative because both characters have understandable motivations. Logan's exhaustion is believable after centuries of loss. Yashida's fear of death is equally human. The audience may not approve of Yashida's methods, but they can understand the emotions driving his decisions. Another major source of conflict involves Logan's role as Mariko's protector. Initially, Logan accepts responsibility almost reluctantly. He has spent years avoiding emotional attachment because he believes everyone close to him eventually suffers. Protecting Mariko, therefore, places him in direct conflict with his own desire for emotional distance. As the story progresses, their relationship gradually deepens. This emotional connection significantly raises the stakes. If Logan fails, Mariko dies. If he succeeds, he risks opening himself to another devastating personal loss. Unlike many action films where protecting someone remains purely a professional obligation, Logan's growing affection transforms every threat against Mariko into a deeply personal conflict. One of the most interesting aspects of the Wolverine is that it does not rely on a single straightforward villain. Instead, the film presents multiple antagonistic forces, each representing a different type of obstacle for Logan. Some oppose him physically, others manipulate him psychologically, and some embody larger philosophical ideas that challenge his understanding of life, death, and identity. Together, these antagonists create a layered conflict in which Logan must overcome not only dangerous enemies, but also emotional wounds that have haunted him for decades. At the center of the story is Ichiro Yashida, a character whose evolution from grateful survivor to desperate antagonist forms the emotional core of the film. When audiences first meet Yashida during the opening sequence in Nagasaki, he appears honorable, disciplined, and deeply human. Logan saves his life by shielding him from the atomic explosion, creating a debt that shapes Yashida's entire existence. This opening immediately complicates the audience's expectations. Unlike many villains introduced through cruelty or violence, Yashida begins as someone worthy of sympathy. He experiences one of history's greatest tragedies, survives only because of Logan's sacrifice, and spends decades remembering the man who saved him. For much of the film, viewers naturally assume his gratitude remains genuine. However, beneath this admiration lies an obsession that gradually consumes him. Watching Logan survive impossible injuries during the atomic bombing fundamentally changes Yashida's understanding of mortality. He witnesses a man capable of healing from wounds that would instantly kill anyone else. Instead of simply appreciating this miracle, Yashida begins longing for it himself. As the decades pass, this desire transforms into fear. He builds an enormous business empire. He gains wealth. He gains influence. He creates one of Japan's most powerful corporations. Yet despite achieving everything society associates with success, he cannot escape one unavoidable reality. He is growing old. His body weakens. Death approaches. This fear becomes Yashida's defining motivation. Unlike many comic book villains who seek domination or destruction, Yashida wants something profoundly human. He wants more time. He wants to avoid death. He wants another chance to continue living. These desires make him psychologically believable. Most people fear death. Most people wish for more time. The difference lies in how Yashida responds to those fears. Instead of accepting mortality, he becomes willing to sacrifice others in order to escape it. This gradual moral corruption transforms him into the film's primary antagonist. What makes Yashida particularly compelling is that he genuinely believes Logan would benefit from surrendering his healing factor. When he offers Logan mortality early in the film, his proposal initially sounds compassionate. Logan is emotionally exhausted. He has repeatedly expressed weariness with endless life. Yashida appears to offer exactly what Logan secretly desires. Only later does the audience discover that this apparent generosity conceals manipulation. His true objective has never been helping Logan. It has always been saving himself. This revelation fundamentally changes the audience's understanding of earlier scenes. Conversations that initially seemed sincere suddenly reveal hidden motives. Every expression of gratitude becomes part of a carefully constructed deception. Symbolically, Yashida represents humanity's refusal to accept the natural cycle of life. Throughout history, countless myths have explored individuals seeking immortality. Kings searched for magical elixirs. Alchemists pursued eternal youth. Scientists dreamed of defeating aging. Yashida continues this tradition. His obsession demonstrates how fear of death can eventually destroy both morality and wisdom. In contrast, Logan begins the story wanting death, but ultimately learns to value life again. Yashida begins desperately clinging to life until his obsession destroys everything he claims to love. Their journeys move in opposite directions. This philosophical contrast elevates their conflict beyond physical confrontation. Another major antagonist is Viper, one of the film's most visually distinctive characters. Unlike Yashida, whose threat emerges gradually through psychological manipulation, Viper immediately projects danger through appearance, behavior, and abilities. She functions as both scientist and assassin, using poison as her primary weapon. Poison serves as an especially appropriate power because it directly opposes Logan's healing factor. For years, audiences had watched Wolverine recover from nearly every imaginable injury. Viper introduces a threat capable of attacking his greatest strength from within. Instead of overpowering Logan physically, she weakens the very ability that defines him. This approach creates far greater suspense than simply introducing a stronger fighter. Her personality also differs significantly from Logan's. Where Logan values loyalty, compassion, and sacrifice, Viper demonstrates emotional detachment. She treats people as experimental subjects rather than individuals. Scientific curiosity outweighs empathy. This coldness makes her unsettling because she rarely displays ordinary human emotion. Her fascination with mutation also reflects one of the recurring themes within the X-Men universe. Mutant abilities can become gifts or tools depending upon the values of those possessing them. Logan uses extraordinary powers primarily to protect others. Viper uses hers to manipulate, exploit, and dominate. Although Viper receives less emotional development than Yashida, she serves an important symbolic function. She represents corruption through science without ethics. Knowledge itself is not dangerous. The willingness to ignore moral responsibility while pursuing knowledge becomes the true threat. Several scenes emphasize this idea through experimentation involving Logan's healing factor. Technology and biology combine in increasingly disturbing ways. Rather than respecting the uniqueness of mutant abilities, Viper reduces them to resources waiting to be harvested. Another important antagonistic force comes from Shinjin Yashida. Unlike the primary villains, Shinjin occupies a morally ambiguous position for much of the film. Initially, he appears arrogant, emotionally distant, and deeply frustrated by his family's internal dynamics. His complicated relationship with both his father and daughter creates ongoing tension throughout the story. The Wolverine follows many elements of the classic hero's journey while also adapting the structure to fit the unique nature of Logan's character. Unlike many traditional heroes, Logan does not begin his adventure as an ordinary person who dreams of becoming extraordinary. He begins as someone who has already lived through countless adventures, survived wars, saved the world multiple times, and experienced unimaginable loss. Because of this, his journey is less about discovering heroism and more about rediscovering his humanity. His greatest transformation is emotional rather than physical. Throughout the film, Logan confronts grief, mortality, guilt, and identity, eventually emerging with a renewed sense of purpose. The hero's journey, often associated with mythologist Joseph Campbell, consists of several stages that describe how many legendary heroes evolve over the course of a story. While not every film follows every stage exactly, The Wolverine closely mirrors this structure, though several stages are interpreted in more mature and unconventional ways. The story begins with the ordinary world. In many adventure stories, the ordinary world shows the audience what life is like before the adventure begins. For Logan, however, there's nothing ordinary about his existence. He is an immortal mutant who has witnessed more than a century of history. Nevertheless, the film establishes a version of normal life by showing him living alone in the Canadian wilderness. This isolation immediately communicates several important facts. Logan has withdrawn from humanity. He lives away from civilization. He avoids emotional relationships. He spends his time hunting, surviving, and trying to escape painful memories. Rather than enjoying peace, he appears emotionally empty. This version of the ordinary world is defined not by comfort, but by emotional exhaustion. James Mangold deliberately presents Logan as a man who has stopped living even though he continues surviving. His environment reflects this condition. The snow-covered forests are quiet. The campsites are temporary. The surrounding wilderness emphasizes solitude. There are no family members, no teammates, no friends. The world around Logan feels as emotionally frozen as the landscape itself. The next stage is the call to adventure. Every hero eventually receives an invitation to leave the familiar world behind. For Logan, this invitation arrives through Yukio. She travels across the world to find him and delivers a message from Ichiro Yashida. The elderly businessman wishes to thank Logan personally before he dies. At first glance, this request appears simple. A dying man wants to express gratitude. However, the audience quickly senses that something more significant lies beneath the surface. Yukio herself adds mystery. She clearly knows more than she initially reveals. Her confidence and optimism contrast sharply with Logan's emotional fatigue. She represents movement entering a life defined by stillness. The invitation to Japan becomes Logan's call to adventure. The next stage is the refusal of the call. Many heroes hesitate before accepting dangerous journeys. Logan follows this tradition. His reluctance does not come from fear of physical danger. He has faced impossible odds countless times. Instead, he resists because he no longer wishes to become emotionally involved in anyone else's life. He believes attachment inevitably leads to suffering. Every important relationship has ended in tragedy. The memory of Jean Grey continues haunting him. Returning to civilization means risking new emotional wounds. His refusal reflects psychological exhaustion rather than cowardice. Eventually, Logan accepts the invitation. He does so primarily out of respect for Yashida. Years earlier, Logan saved the young soldier's life during the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. Now Yashida wishes to see him one final time. Logan's personal code of honor compels him to grant this request. This decision officially begins the journey. The next stage involves crossing the threshold. Crossing the threshold represents leaving the familiar world and entering an unfamiliar environment governed by different rules. Logan's arrival in Japan perfectly illustrates this transition. Everything changes. The quiet wilderness disappears. Crowded cities replace forests. Traditional customs replace isolation. Family politics replace solitude. Ancient honor codes intersect with modern corporate power. Japan is not simply a new location. It is an entirely different cultural world requiring Logan to adapt. He no longer controls his surroundings. Instead, he must learn to navigate unfamiliar traditions, expectations, and relationships. Crossing this threshold also marks the beginning of another transformation. Logan gradually shifts from observing life to participating in it once again. Soon after entering this new world, heroes traditionally encounter tests, allies, and enemies. This stage occupies much of the film's middle section. Logan meets several individuals who shape his journey. Yukio becomes one of his earliest allies. Although mysterious at first, she repeatedly demonstrates loyalty, courage, and optimism. Unlike Logan, Yukio embraces life despite understanding its uncertainty. Her positive outlook slowly influences him throughout the story. Mariko becomes another essential ally. Initially, Logan views her primarily as someone requiring protection. As they spend more time together, however, their relationship develops into mutual trust and affection. Mariko represents the possibility of peace. For perhaps the first time in years, Logan begins imagining a future that does not revolve entirely around violence. The enemies also begin appearing. The Yakuza pursue Mariko. Viper secretly manipulates events. Family tensions within the Yashida household create uncertainty. Logan's healing factor mysteriously weakens. Each challenge tests a different aspect of his character. Physical strength alone becomes insufficient. He must rely upon intelligence, resilience, trust, and emotional growth. One of the most important stages in the hero's journey is approaching the innermost cave. Symbolically, the innermost cave represents the place where the hero confronts his deepest fear. For Logan, this cave is not merely a physical location. It is his own mortality. For generations, he believed himself almost impossible to kill. Now his healing factor begins failing. One of the most overlooked aspects of the Wolverine is how carefully its technology and visual effects support the story rather than dominate it. Released in 2013, the film arrived during a period when superhero movies were becoming increasingly dependent on massive amounts of computer-generated imagery. Audiences had already seen entire cities destroyed by digital armies, alien invasions filling the sky, and increasingly complex visual spectacles that push computer graphics to new limits. While the Wolverine certainly uses advanced visual effects throughout its runtime, director James Mangold deliberately chose a more restrained approach. Instead of allowing technology to become the star of the movie, every digital effect was designed to strengthen the emotional journey of Logan and create believable action grounded in physical reality. This philosophy can be seen from the opening scenes. The recreation of Nagasaki during World War II required an extensive combination of practical filmmaking techniques and digital effects. The filmmakers could not simply recreate one of history's most devastating events with traditional sets alone. Large sections of the city, military installations, smoke, destruction, aircraft, and the atomic explosion itself were enhanced or created through visual effects. However, what makes this sequence memorable is not simply the scale of the explosion. The visual effects exist to communicate fear. The audience watches Logan shield Yashida from unimaginable destruction, and the effects support the emotional impact rather than distracting from it. Fire, shockwaves, collapsing structures, and debris all contribute to the realism of the moment while maintaining focus on the characters. The sequence never feels like a visual effects demonstration. Instead, it serves as an emotional foundation for the relationship that drives the rest of the film. One of the greatest technical challenges faced by the filmmakers involved Wolverine himself. Hugh Jackman's performance required an enormous amount of invisible visual effects work throughout the movie. Because audiences had already become familiar with Wolverine's claws over several previous films, the effects artists needed to create digital enhancements that looked completely natural. Contrary to what many viewers assume, Wolverine's claws are not always entirely computer-generated. Depending on the requirements of individual scenes, several different techniques were used. Practical metal claws were employed during close-up shots where actors physically interacted with them. Rubber versions were used during dangerous stunt work to ensure safety. Digital claws replaced or enhanced practical versions whenever complex movements or impossible camera angles required computer assistance. This combination allowed the filmmakers to achieve realism while maintaining flexibility during production. The integration between practical props and digital effects became so seamless that many viewers could not distinguish where one technique ended and the other began. This invisible craftsmanship represents one of the highest compliments visual effects artists can receive. If audiences never notice the effects, it often means they have succeeded perfectly. Another enormous technical achievement involved Logan's healing factor. Unlike obvious visual spectacles, such as explosions or giant monsters, healing wounds presents a different challenge. The audience expects injuries to appear convincing before disappearing naturally. To accomplish this, the effects team combined practical makeup with digital enhancements. Hugh Jackman often wore elaborate prosthetic wounds during filming. These practical injuries gave actors something tangible to react to while allowing lighting and shadows to behave naturally on camera. Later, digital artists carefully removed wounds frame by frame as Logan healed. This gradual regeneration required remarkable attention to detail. Skin had to reform naturally. Blood needed to disappear progressively. Muscle tissue reconstructed itself over time. Rather than appearing artificial, the healing process feels organic because practical and digital techniques complement one another. Ironically, one of the film's most important visual effects achievements occurs when Logan stops healing. Because his healing factor weakens throughout much of the movie, the effects team intentionally allowed injuries to remain visible much longer than audiences had previously seen. Bruises accumulate. Cuts remain open. Blood stains clothing. Facial injuries linger. Exhaustion becomes physically visible. This decision required significantly less spectacular animation, but produced much greater emotional impact. The absence of healing became more important than the healing itself. From a storytelling perspective, this technical choice transformed every action scene. Audiences suddenly realized Logan could genuinely suffer lasting consequences. Perhaps the film's most famous action sequence occurs aboard Japan's high-speed bullet train. This scene represents one of the movie's greatest combinations of practical stunt work and computer-generated imagery. At first glance, many viewers assume nearly everything was created digitally. In reality, substantial portions of the sequence involved practical filming. Large train sections were physically constructed. Actors performed numerous close-range fight sequences on actual sets. Wire work allowed performers to simulate extreme movement while maintaining safety. Digital effects then extended environments, enhanced speed, removed safety equipment, and created the illusion that characters fought atop a train traveling more than 200 miles per hour. Wind simulation became one of the sequence's greatest technical challenges. The speed of the train required visual effects artists to carefully calculate how clothing, hair, debris, and body movement should react. Every punch had to account for momentum. Every jump required believable physics. The environment itself became an active participant in the action. Instead of simply providing a background, the train created constant danger. The digital work, therefore, served physical storytelling rather than replacing it. Another impressive aspect of the film involves location enhancement. The Wolverine was filmed extensively in Australia, while representing numerous locations throughout Japan. Visual effects artists seamlessly blended practical photography with digital extensions. City skylines expanded. Traditional architecture connected naturally with surrounding landscapes. While the Wolverine contains memorable action scenes, impressive visual effects, and large-scale confrontations, its greatest strength lies in its emotional storytelling. Rather than relying solely on spectacle to entertain audiences, the film builds its narrative around grief, loneliness, hope, sacrifice, redemption, and the psychological burden of immortality. Every major action sequence carries emotional significance because it reflects Logan's internal struggles. The audience is not simply watching Wolverine fight enemies. They are watching a man who has lived for generations attempt to rediscover a reason to keep living. This emotional foundation gives the film a level of maturity that separates it from many superhero movies released during the same period. The emotional journey begins immediately with the opening sequence in Nagasaki. Before viewers even understand where the story is heading, they witness Logan protecting a young Japanese soldier from the atomic bombing. The sequence works because it combines historical tragedy with personal sacrifice. Logan gains nothing by saving Yashida. He is a prisoner of war. The people around him are technically his enemies. No one expects him to act. Yet he willingly places himself between another human being and certain death. This moment immediately reminds audiences that beneath Wolverine's rough personality lies extraordinary compassion. The emotional impact comes not from the visual effects alone, but from Logan's instinctive willingness to sacrifice himself for someone else. The tragedy of Nagasaki also introduces one of the film's most important emotional themes. Logan survives. Thousands of others do not. For ordinary people, survival after such destruction would be miraculous. For Logan, survival becomes another burden. Because he cannot die naturally, he must continue carrying memories that countless others never had the chance to process. This idea quietly shapes the rest of the movie. Every historical event Logan has witnessed remains alive inside him. Every loss continues accumulating. Unlike ordinary people, he never receives the release that mortality eventually provides. Perhaps the strongest emotional element throughout the film is Logan's grief over Jean Grey. Although Jean physically died during the events of X-Men, The Last Stand, emotionally she remains one of the central characters in the Wolverine. Her appearances through dreams and hallucinations constantly remind viewers that Logan has never truly recovered. What makes these scenes particularly effective is their ambiguity. The audience understands these encounters are not literal reunions. Instead, Jean represents guilt. She embodies the emotional wound Logan cannot heal. His healing factor repairs broken bones. It cannot repair heartbreak. Each dream functions almost like a conversation with his own conscience. Jean repeatedly encourages him to stop fighting. She tempts him with rest. She represents the possibility of finally escaping endless emotional pain. These moments resonate because they portray depression in symbolic form. Rather than explaining Logan's psychological state through lengthy dialogue, the film allows viewers to experience it alongside him. Sleep, which should provide peace, instead becomes another battlefield. Hugh Jackman's performance plays a major role in creating this emotional impact. Throughout the film, he deliberately underplays Logan's emotions. Instead of dramatic speeches or exaggerated displays of sadness, Jackman often communicates grief through silence. Small facial expressions, long pauses, tired eyes, subtle body language. These restrained choices make Logan feel authentic. Real grief rarely announces itself loudly. It often appears through exhaustion, emotional distance, and quiet resignation. One particularly moving aspect of Logan's character is his loneliness. Although surrounded by people for much of the story, he behaves like someone who expects every meaningful relationship to end in tragedy. This expectation influences every interaction. He keeps emotional distance. He hesitates before trusting others. He rarely discusses his own feelings. Years of loss have taught him that attachment usually brings pain. Many audience members connected with this aspect of the character because it reflects a universal emotional experience. Everyone eventually loses people they love. Most individuals understand the temptation to avoid future heartbreak by refusing new emotional connections. Logan simply experiences this struggle on an extraordinary scale. The relationship between Logan and Mariko gradually becomes the emotional center of the film. Unlike many superhero romances that develop rapidly, this relationship grows through shared experiences. They protect one another. They spend quiet moments talking. They learn about each other's fears. Trust develops naturally. Mariko never attempts to change Logan. Instead, she accepts him despite understanding the violence surrounding his life. For Logan, Mariko represents something he has almost forgotten: normalcy, peace, the possibility of an ordinary future. Simple moments between them often carry more emotional weight than the film's largest action scenes. Whether sharing conversations in quiet rooms or simply enjoying temporary safety together, these scenes remind audiences what Logan is actually fighting to preserve. The romance also avoids becoming overly sentimental. Both characters carry emotional scars. Neither pretends life has been easy. Their connection feels believable precisely because it develops through mutual vulnerability rather than idealized fantasy. Yukio contributes another important emotional dimension. Unlike Logan, whose worldview has become dominated by loss, Yukio approaches life with optimism. She acknowledges danger without allowing it to define her. Her cheerful personality repeatedly interrupts Logan's emotional isolation. Rather than forcing positivity onto him, she patiently demonstrates that hope remains possible. One of the film's most memorable emotional moments occurs when Yukio reveals her vision of Logan dying while holding his own heart. This prophecy creates several emotional effects simultaneously. It increases suspense. It reinforces Logan's mortality. It reminds audiences that even seemingly invincible heroes can fall. Most importantly, it reveals Yukio's concern for Logan. She does not speak about his death casually. She fears losing someone she deeply respects. Her loyalty becomes one of the film's quiet emotional anchors. The Wolverine is based primarily on one of the most celebrated Wolverine comic book stories ever published. While the film draws inspiration from numerous elements found throughout Marvel Comics, its strongest influence comes from the 1982 limited comic series written by Chris Claremont and illustrated by Frank Miller. That storyline remains one of the defining moments in Wolverine's publishing history because it transformed him from a popular supporting member of the X-Men into a fully developed, leading character capable of carrying his own stories. Before the release of this comic series, Wolverine was often viewed mainly as the team's fierce fighter. Readers appreciated his claws, healing factor, and aggressive personality, but many aspects of his character remained unexplored. Chris Claremont believed Wolverine possessed much greater emotional depth than readers had yet seen, while Frank Miller's dramatic visual storytelling helped present Logan as both a warrior and a deeply conflicted human being. Their story introduced ideas that permanently changed Wolverine's mythology. Japan became one of the most important locations in his history. The samurai code influenced his personal philosophy. Honor became as significant as violence. Love and loss became central emotional themes. The conflict between the man and the animal inside Logan became one of the defining ideas of the character. Although the Wolverine does not directly adapt every event from the comic, nearly every major emotional theme originates from this influential storyline. One of the biggest similarities between the comic and the film is the setting. Instead of remaining in North America alongside the X-Men, Logan travels to Japan. This change of location immediately alters the tone. Japan provides an environment where tradition and modernity exist together. Ancient castles stand alongside towering skyscrapers. Centuries-old customs continue within one of the world's most technologically advanced societies. This contrast fascinated both the comic creators and the filmmakers. For Logan, Japan represents a place where strength alone is not enough. Honor, patience, discipline, and respect become equally important. The filmmakers embraced this aspect of the comic almost completely. Throughout the movie, audiences experience traditional ceremonies, family customs, samurai symbolism, and Japanese architecture alongside modern trains, corporate headquarters, and advanced technology. This cultural contrast forms one of the strongest links between the source material and the adaptation. Another major element preserved from the comic involves Logan's relationship with Mariko. In the original story, Mariko Yashida is not simply a romantic interest. She represents the peaceful life Logan secretly desires but believes he can never truly have. Unlike many superhero romances that focus primarily on attraction, Logan and Mariko's relationship develops through mutual respect. She sees the humanity hidden beneath Wolverine's violent reputation. He admires her compassion, dignity, and strength. The film preserves this emotional foundation. Although certain plot details differ, Mariko continues serving as Logan's emotional anchor. She offers him the possibility of something he has almost forgotten, a future beyond endless conflict. Their relationship develops gradually rather than instantly. Shared danger builds trust. Conversations reveal vulnerability. Quiet moments become as important as action scenes. The filmmakers wisely avoided reducing Mariko to a simple love interest. Instead, she remains an essential part of Logan's emotional transformation. The concept of Wolverine struggling between his civilized and animalistic sides also comes directly from the comics. Chris Claremont repeatedly explored this psychological conflict. Logan possesses extraordinary violence within him, yet constantly attempts to control it. He wants to be a man rather than merely a weapon. The film embraces this internal struggle. Although Logan remains capable of tremendous brutality, he rarely enjoys violence. Instead, he constantly chooses restraint whenever possible. The opening scene involving the poison bear illustrates this perfectly. The hunters kill carelessly. Logan acts only when necessary. His respect for life distinguishes him from those who use violence selfishly. This emphasis on moral discipline closely reflects Claremont's interpretation of the character. However, while many important themes remain faithful to the comics, the film also introduces significant changes. Perhaps the largest difference involves the story's central villain. In the comic series, Logan's primary conflict centers on Shingen Yashida. Shingen serves as both Mariko's father and the chief obstacle preventing Logan from achieving happiness. He humiliates Wolverine publicly, questions his honor, represents everything corrupt about power without responsibility. Their rivalry becomes intensely personal. The film dramatically alters this structure. Instead of making Shingen the primary antagonist, the screenplay gradually reveals Ichiro Yashida as the true mastermind. Initially portrayed as a grateful old man approaching death, Yashida ultimately becomes the film's principal villain. This change significantly alters the emotional focus. The comic emphasizes honor, family reputation, and personal redemption. The film shifts attention toward mortality and humanity's fear of death. By making Yashida the central antagonist, the filmmakers created stronger thematic connections between Logan's immortality and Yashida's desperate desire to escape aging. This new conflict allowed the screenplay to explore philosophical questions not emphasized as strongly in the original comic. Another major addition is the weakening of Logan's healing factor. This storyline does not appear in the original Claremont and Miller comic. Instead, it was developed specifically for the film. From a storytelling perspective, this was one of the adaptation's smartest decisions. Audiences had already watched Wolverine survive nearly every imaginable injury across several previous X-Men films. If Logan remained completely invincible, many action scenes would lack suspense. By temporarily removing his greatest advantage, the filmmakers restored vulnerability. Every injury suddenly mattered. Every fight became unpredictable. This change also strengthened the emotional narrative. Logan's physical weakness mirrored his emotional exhaustion. One of the reasons the Wolverine continues to reward repeat viewings is the remarkable number of hidden details, subtle references, visual callbacks, and comic book Easter eggs woven throughout the film. Unlike movies that rely entirely on obvious references for longtime fans, the Wolverine often hides its connections beneath dialogue, production design, character behavior, costume choices, and visual symbolism. Some of these details honor decades of Marvel Comics history, while others acknowledge previous X-Men films, Japanese culture, classic samurai cinema, and even Hugh Jackman's own portrayal of Wolverine. Many casual viewers notice only the film's surface story, but repeated viewings reveal numerous layers of thoughtful filmmaking. The very first sequence in Nagasaki contains one of the film's most significant hidden meanings. On the surface, the scene introduces the relationship between Logan and Ichiro Yashida. However, it also quietly establishes the central philosophical conflict that will define the entire movie. When Logan willingly shields Yashida from the atomic explosion, the audience naturally views the act as pure heroism. Only later do viewers realize that this moment also creates Yashida's lifelong obsession. Logan unknowingly gives Yashida something far more dangerous than life. He gives him proof that immortality exists. Every decision Yashida makes over the following decades traces back to this single moment. The opening therefore functions as both a rescue scene and the origin story of the film's villain. This narrative symmetry often goes unnoticed during the first viewing. Another subtle detail involves Logan's prisoner identification during the World War II sequence. Although briefly visible, the prison setting quietly reinforces Wolverine's long history of surviving human conflicts. He is not merely a superhero existing outside history. He has fought, suffered, and endured alongside ordinary people throughout some of humanity's darkest moments. This idea strengthens the emotional weight of his immortality. Every historical tragedy becomes another memory he must carry forever. One of the film's strongest pieces of visual symbolism appears through the poisoned bear. Initially, the bear seems like an isolated subplot. Logan watches hunters wound the animal using poisoned arrows rather than confronting it fairly. The bear eventually dies slowly despite its tremendous physical strength. Only later does the audience realize the bear foreshadows Logan's own condition. Just like the bear, Logan becomes poisoned. His strength begins failing. His healing no longer functions properly. He struggles despite possessing extraordinary power. The bear also represents Logan himself on a symbolic level. Both are powerful creatures who generally avoid unnecessary conflict. Both respond violently only when threatened. Both become victims of human cruelty rather than their own aggression. The filmmakers never explain this symbolism directly. Instead, they trust viewers to recognize the connection naturally. The dream sequences featuring Jean Grey contain numerous hidden emotional details. Every appearance of Jean reflects Logan's psychological state at that specific point in the story. Early dreams portray temptation. Jean invites Logan to rest, to stop fighting, to surrender. As the narrative progresses and Logan gradually reconnects with life, these visions subtly change. Rather than simply representing grief, Jean increasingly becomes a reminder of what Logan must overcome. She evolves from temptation into acceptance. By the end of the film, Logan no longer defines himself entirely through guilt. This emotional progression occurs quietly, without explicit explanation. James Mangold allows visual storytelling to communicate Logan's healing. Many viewers also notice that Jean frequently appears surrounded by soft lighting and calm environments. These dreamlike settings contrast sharply with the harsh realities of Logan's waking life. The contrast reinforces the seductive nature of surrender. Dreams offer peace. Reality demands struggle. Another fascinating detail involves Logan's clothing throughout the film. Unlike many superheroes who wear distinctive costumes, Logan spends most of the movie dressed in ordinary clothing. However, these wardrobe choices subtly evolve. Early outfits emphasize darker colors, heavy jackets, simple work clothes. They reflect emotional isolation. As Logan develops closer relationships with Mariko and Yukio, his appearance gradually becomes less severe. The changes remain subtle enough that many viewers never consciously notice them. Costume design quietly mirrors emotional development. The Yashida family estate contains numerous visual references to Japanese history and samurai traditions. Carefully arranged gardens, traditional wooden architecture, sliding paper doors, stone pathways, historical artwork. These details are not simply decorative. They reinforce recurring themes involving honor, discipline, patience, and family legacy. Even the layout of the estate reflects hierarchy and tradition. Different sections communicate social status without characters needing to explain these relationships verbally. One particularly interesting visual detail appears during Logan's first meeting with Yashida in the present. Yashida appears physically fragile. Machines surround him. Medical equipment sustains his life. Meanwhile, Logan stands healthy despite being well over 100 years old. The visual contrast silently communicates everything audiences need to understand about Yashida's motivation. One man desperately clings to life. The other has grown tired of it. No lengthy exposition becomes necessary because the imagery speaks for itself. The bullet train sequence contains several references for longtime Wolverine fans. Beyond being one of the film's most spectacular action scenes, it symbolizes Logan's changing relationship with danger. In previous X-Men films, Wolverine often charged directly into impossible situations without hesitation because his healing factor guaranteed survival. Here, however, every movement appears more cautious. His injuries matter. His calculations become more careful. The action choreography itself tells the audience that this version of Logan has fundamentally changed. The famous claws also receive surprisingly thoughtful treatment. Throughout the X-Men series, Wolverine's claws often symbolize aggression. In the Wolverine, they frequently symbolize protection instead. Logan draws them primarily when defending someone else. The Wolverine occupied a unique position in the history of superhero filmmaking. Released in 2013, the movie arrived during a period when comic book films had become one of Hollywood's most profitable genres. Marvel Studios had already demonstrated the enormous financial potential of interconnected cinematic universes. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy had raised expectations for mature superhero storytelling, and audiences around the world had embraced increasingly ambitious comic book adaptations. However, The Wolverine also carried significant pressure because it followed the disappointing reception of X-Men Origins. Wolverine, the first solo Wolverine film released in 2009. Although X-Men Origins, Wolverine performed well financially, many critics and longtime fans expressed disappointment with its story, visual effects, and portrayal of several beloved comic book characters. As a result, the creative team behind the Wolverine faced an unusual challenge. The movie needed to satisfy multiple audiences at once. It had to convince disappointed fans that Wolverine deserved a stronger solo adventure. It needed to appeal to casual moviegoers who simply wanted an entertaining action film. It also had to continue expanding the larger X-Men film franchise while remaining accessible to viewers who had not seen every previous installment. These expectations made the project's financial performance especially important. The production budget reflected the studio's confidence in Wolverine as one of its most valuable characters. Reports placed the film's production cost at approximately $120 million, making it one of the more expensive entries in the X-Men series at that time. However, production costs represent only part of a film's financial investment. Large Hollywood releases also require extensive worldwide marketing campaigns. Television advertising, online promotion, movie posters, international premieres, press tours, television interviews, magazine features, promotional partnerships, trailers shown before other major releases. All of these activities significantly increase total spending beyond the official production budget. Although exact marketing costs are rarely disclosed publicly, industry analysts generally estimate that major studio films often spend tens of millions of additional dollars promoting worldwide releases. This means that profitability depends on much more than simply earning back the production budget. The film entered theaters during the competitive summer release season. Summer has traditionally been one of Hollywood's most important periods because schools are closed in many countries and audiences often attend more movies. At the same time, competition becomes much stronger. Studios frequently schedule their biggest blockbusters during these months. As a result, every major release competes for audience attention against numerous high-profile films. The Wolverine therefore needed strong marketing and positive audience reactions to stand out within an extremely crowded marketplace. Before release, one of the studio's primary marketing strategies emphasized differentiation from the previous Wolverine film. Rather than presenting non-stop explosions and comic book spectacle, promotional material highlighted a more grounded story. Trailers focused heavily on Logan's emotional struggle, the Japanese setting, the weakening of his healing factor, his apparent vulnerability. This approach immediately distinguished the Wolverine from both its predecessor and many other superhero movies released around the same time. The marketing repeatedly asked a simple but powerful question: what happens when the man who cannot die suddenly becomes vulnerable? This concept proved highly effective because it introduced genuine suspense into a character audiences already believed to be nearly invincible. Hugh Jackman also played an essential role in the promotional campaign. By 2013, Jackman had portrayed Wolverine for well over a decade. His dedication to the role had earned widespread respect among both critics and fans. He participated extensively in interviews, international premieres, fan events, and media appearances promoting the film. Unlike some actors who appeared disconnected from their comic book characters, Jackman's enthusiasm consistently strengthened audience confidence. His long association with Wolverine had become one of the franchise's greatest commercial assets. The film opened successfully in many international markets before expanding further worldwide. International audiences have historically supported the X-Men franchise particularly well, and the Wolverine continued this trend. Japan naturally received significant promotional attention because the story itself takes place there. The cultural setting allowed marketing campaigns to emphasize both Hollywood spectacle and Japanese influences. This helped generate interest among audiences who appreciated action films, as well as those interested in seeing Japanese culture represented within a major international production. North American box office performance proved solid, though not record-breaking. The opening weekend demonstrated that audience interest in Wolverine remained strong despite disappointment surrounding the earlier solo film. Positive word of mouth during subsequent weeks helped maintain respectable attendance. Unlike some blockbusters that collapsed rapidly after opening weekend, The Wolverine benefited from generally favorable audience reactions. Many viewers appreciated its more character-focused storytelling. Critics also responded more positively than they had to X-Men Origins, Wolverine. While reviews varied, many praised Hugh Jackman's performance, James Mangold's direction, the Japanese setting, and the film's willingness to explore Wolverine's emotional struggles rather than relying entirely on action. This stronger critical reception became valuable from a business perspective. Positive reviews often encourage undecided moviegoers to purchase tickets. They also improve long-term reputation, increasing future home media sales and streaming interest. Worldwide, The Wolverine earned more than $410 million at the global box office. This result comfortably exceeded its production budget and positioned the film among the stronger financial performers within the X-Men franchise. Importantly, box office revenue is shared between movie theaters and film distributors. Studios do not keep every dollar earned from ticket sales. From the moment The Wolverine was announced, it attracted enormous attention from one of the most passionate fan communities in superhero cinema. Wolverine had already become one of Marvel's most beloved characters over several decades of comic book history, and Hugh Jackman's portrayal had earned widespread admiration since his first appearance in X-Men in 2000. Because of this, expectations surrounding the film extended far beyond ordinary audience curiosity. Comic readers, longtime X-Men fans, casual moviegoers, collectors, cosplayers, online communities, and film critics all approached the project with different hopes and expectations. The conversations surrounding the movie began years before its release and have continued long afterward, making The Wolverine an important chapter in the character's ongoing fan culture. One of the biggest reasons for this anticipation was the disappointment many fans experienced with X-Men Origins, Wolverine in 2009. Although that film achieved financial success, a large portion of the fan community believed it failed to capture what made Wolverine such a compelling character in the comics. Many criticized the screenplay. Others questioned the portrayal of several supporting characters. Some felt the movie relied too heavily on spectacle while neglecting Logan's emotional complexity. As a result, when news emerged that James Mangold would direct a new solo Wolverine film inspired by the famous Japanese comic storyline, excitement immediately mixed with cautious optimism. Fans wanted redemption. They wanted a movie that respected Wolverine's history. They hoped to see the thoughtful, honorable, emotionally scarred warrior they had loved in the comics for decades. Before release, online discussions became increasingly active. Comic book forums, movie websites, YouTube channels, social media platforms, entertainment podcasts. Every new photograph, casting announcement, trailer, or interview generated thousands of reactions. Fans carefully analyzed every available image. Many immediately recognized visual references to Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's legendary comic series. The Japanese setting alone created enormous enthusiasm because readers had long considered that storyline one of Wolverine's greatest adventures. Trailer breakdown videos became especially popular. Viewers paused individual frames, searching for hidden comic references. Could that armored figure be the Silver Samurai? Would Yukio remain faithful to her comic counterpart? How closely would the movie adapt the original story? Would Logan finally receive the mature character study many fans believed he deserved? These questions fueled months of speculation before audiences ever entered theaters. Another important topic within the fan community involved Hugh Jackman himself. By 2013, he had portrayed Wolverine for more than a decade. Many fans no longer separated the actor from the character. Jackman's physical transformation for each film consistently impressed audiences. His commitment to extensive training became legendary. Every new Wolverine movie sparked discussions about his exercise routines, diet, stunt preparation, and dedication to maintaining the character's demanding physical appearance. Fans frequently commented that Jackman approached Wolverine with remarkable respect. He openly acknowledged comic book readers. He attended fan conventions. He participated enthusiastically in interviews. He consistently expressed gratitude toward audiences. This genuine enthusiasm strengthened the relationship between actor and fan community. Many viewers felt Jackman understood why Wolverine mattered to them beyond simple entertainment. Following the film's release, one of the most common discussions centered on James Mangold's interpretation of Wolverine. Many longtime fans appreciated the decision to create a slower, more character-driven story. Rather than presenting non-stop action from beginning to end, the film emphasized Logan's grief, mortality, and emotional recovery. For readers familiar with the comics, This approach felt much closer to the spirit of classic Wolverine stories. Many fans described the film as finally giving Logan room to breathe as a character instead of functioning merely as an action hero. At the same time, certain creative decisions divided opinion. The Silver Samurai became perhaps the most debated element of the movie. Comic readers knew the Silver Samurai as a completely separate Marvel character with his own personality and history. The film instead reimagined him as a massive mechanized suit controlled by Yashida. Some viewers appreciated the symbolic interpretation. Others preferred a more faithful adaptation. Online discussions comparing comic panels with scenes from the film remained active for years. This debate illustrates one of the most interesting aspects of fandom. Fans often disagree passionately while remaining equally devoted to the source material. Yukio quickly became one of the movie's most popular supporting characters. Many viewers praised her energetic personality, optimism, and loyalty toward Logan. Her distinctive red hair and sword-fighting abilities made her especially recognizable. Cosplayers embraced the character almost immediately after the film's release. At comic conventions around the world, Yukio costumes began appearing alongside more traditional Wolverine, Deadpool, and X-Men costumes. The character's popularity demonstrated how a strong supporting role can leave a lasting impression despite relatively limited screen time. Mariko also received considerable appreciation from audiences. Unlike many romantic interests in blockbuster films, she was generally viewed as intelligent, capable, and emotionally complex. Fans praised the gradual development of her relationship with Logan. Many appreciated that the romance relied on trust and shared experiences rather than instant attraction. Discussion forums frequently highlighted the quieter conversations between Logan and Mariko as some of the movie's strongest scenes. Comic book readers often compared this version of Mariko with her original portrayal. While acknowledging certain differences, many agreed the film successfully captured her compassion, dignity, and importance within Wolverine's emotional journey. The film's Japanese setting became another major topic within fan communities. When The Wolverine premiered in 2013, it received generally positive reviews from critics and audiences, but it was often viewed as a solid superhero film rather than an exceptional one. Many reviewers praised Hugh Jackman's performance, James Mangold's direction, and the film's more grounded storytelling. Yet the movie also lived in the shadow of larger comic book releases that dominated conversations during the early 2010s. At the time, audiences were experiencing an explosion of interconnected cinematic universes, increasingly massive visual spectacles, and superhero films that emphasized world-ending stakes. Against that backdrop, the Wolverine appeared quieter, more intimate, and more character-focused than many of its contemporaries. Over the years, however, public opinion has gradually changed. Today, The Wolverine is frequently described as one of the most underrated superhero movies of its era. Many fans who originally considered it merely good now view it as an important turning point for both the X-Men franchise and Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Logan. Its reputation has steadily improved because later developments in superhero cinema have highlighted many of the qualities that initially received less attention. One of the biggest reasons for this reassessment is the release of Logan in 2017. James Mangold's final Wolverine film achieved widespread critical acclaim and is now regularly included on lists of the greatest superhero films ever made. After experiencing Logan, many viewers returned to the Wolverine with a completely different perspective. Instead of seeing it as an isolated adventure, audiences increasingly viewed it as the emotional bridge between X-Men, The Last Stand, and Logan. Together, these films form a remarkably coherent character journey. The Last Stand explores Logan's devastating loss after Jean Grey's death. The Wolverine examines his struggle to rediscover purpose while living with overwhelming grief. Logan concludes his story by showing an older man who has finally found peace through sacrifice. Seen as part of this larger emotional trilogy, the Wolverine gains significantly greater importance. Many viewers now argue that Logan's emotional impact would have been impossible without the character development established in the Wolverine. Another major factor contributing to the film's improved reputation involves changing audience expectations. In 2013, superhero movies increasingly emphasized enormous battles, large casts, and interconnected franchise storytelling. As years passed, some audiences began expressing fatigue toward constant spectacle. Many viewers started appreciating smaller, more personal superhero stories that focused on individual character development rather than universe-ending threats. The Wolverine fits this newer preference remarkably well. Its central conflict remains deeply personal. Logan is not trying to save the entire world. He is trying to save one family. He is trying to protect Mariko. He is trying to understand whether his own life still has meaning. These quieter stakes now feel refreshing compared to many later superhero films. James Mangold's directing style has also received greater appreciation. Following the success of Logan, critics and audiences revisited Mangold's earlier work with fresh admiration. Many noticed stylistic elements already present in the Wolverine: patient pacing, respect for silence, grounded action, emotional realism, minimal reliance on humor during dramatic scenes, careful character observation. Rather than interrupting emotional moments with constant jokes, Mangold allows conversations to unfold naturally. This restraint has become increasingly admired in retrospect. Viewers now recognize that many storytelling techniques perfected in Logan first appeared in the Wolverine. Hugh Jackman's performance has experienced a similar reevaluation. At the time of release, audiences already praised his portrayal. Today, however, many consider the Wolverine one of his finest performances as the character. Jackman balances physical strength with emotional vulnerability throughout the film. He portrays grief without exaggeration. He communicates loneliness through subtle body language rather than dramatic speeches. His quieter scenes with Mariko, Yukio, and Jean Grey now receive significantly more attention than they originally did. Looking back, many fans believe Jackman had already begun moving toward the more emotionally restrained interpretation that would define Logan. The film's exploration of mortality has become especially meaningful in retrospect. Initially, many viewers focused primarily on Logan losing his healing factor because it increased action scene suspense. Years later, audiences increasingly recognize that this storyline serves a much deeper purpose. For perhaps the first time in his long life, Logan experiences genuine physical vulnerability. This forces him to confront emotional wounds he has avoided for decades. His weakening body becomes a metaphor for emotional healing. Only by accepting vulnerability does he reconnect with life. Modern audiences often praise this symbolic storytelling more strongly than critics did upon the film's original release. Another important area of reassessment involves the movie's treatment of Japanese culture. Contemporary viewers frequently appreciate films that respectfully engage with different cultural traditions rather than simply using international locations as exotic scenery. The Wolverine earns recognition for integrating Japanese architecture, family customs, samurai philosophy, ceremonial traditions, and visual aesthetics directly into the narrative. Although some cultural simplifications remain, many critics acknowledge that the film approaches its setting with genuine admiration. The Japanese environment shapes the story rather than functioning merely as an attractive background. Comic book readers have also softened many earlier criticisms. When a movie first appeared, numerous discussions focused on differences between the screenplay and Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's classic comic storyline. The mechanized silver samurai generated especially strong debate. Some readers disliked replacing the comic character with a giant armored suit. Others questioned changes involving Yashida. Those conversations continue today. However, many longtime fans have become more willing to judge the film on its own artistic goals rather than solely by comparison with the source material.